You are being duped into thinking that the world is against men when men built the entire universe. Loads of the people creating this content, A, don't believe it, and B, don't care about the impacts of it. When you see enough of it, you can see it's just cut and paste misogyny. The same stuff comes up over and over and over again.
What's the antidote for this?
Critical thinking, for a start. Secondly, I think role modeling. And just trying to highlight the good in men.
These guys in the Manosphere are able to show very overtly what success looks like. You know, money, cars, women. But what a lot of young boys are never taught or shown is that success is inner peace, happiness, joy.
100%. We are taught as men to blank all our emotions. Unlearning that takes a lifetime. The only way it's going to change is by...
So, welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Authentic Man Podcast. I have a wonderful guest with me today, a man who I followed on Instagram for a little while. He is speaking about all the things that I think as men we are scared to speak about. We're scared to speak about it to each other. We're scared to speak about it even in our own minds. He's talking about the conversations and the ways in which we subtly and also overtly step into spaces of being misogynists and controlling behavior and things that really as men we don't really want to be. We don't want to be nasty, cruel men. Most men I speak to will tell you, I don't want to be a bad man. That's a very big thing for men. But sometimes these little behaviors creep in. So today I have with me the wonderful man that is Bernie. How are you doing today, Bernie?
I'm really well, David. Thank you very much. That was a really lovely intro, and you've basically encapsulated what I do on Instagram, but also kind of, as we were talking about, just this bit behind the scenes, my work in schools, my work with young people, my work on my book, which is going to be out in autumn. It's a bit vague at the moment. I still need to edit it properly, but yeah, that's with Rutledge. There you go. I'm already selling stuff. I shouldn't be selling stuff. I'm not going to sell stuff.
My first question to you is, what was your journey into doing the work you do now? As you mentioned there, you going to schools, you speaking to schools, to young people, very, from what I can see, secondary school age.
Yeah.
And I know that at some point you were talking about men's health when you've moved into this piece around masculinity, misogyny, relationships. So I'm really curious about what was your journey in that? And also, you touched on, being married for 30 years as well. And before we got on about the kind of emotional aspect for you. So I'm curious about kind of your personal journey and your journey into this work.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try and make quite a long story because I'm 59, so it's quite a long story. But I'm gonna make quite a long story short if I can. Basically, I grew up in Buckinghamshire in a place called Aylesbury, 40 miles north of London. My parents moved to get us into the catchment area for the grammar school, the boys' grammar school. I was lucky enough to get there, but from the moment I got there, I resented it because it was just me and this nerdy kid, Adrian Venables, that I didn't get on with, that was going to the grammar school, and all my real friends were going to the other school. And I thought, that's not fair. So I started with a pretty bad attitude. And anyway, did okay. At sixth form, all my mates went to the local college. And my parents said they thought it would be best if I stayed at the grammar school. And all I'm thinking about is my mates are at the college. They can wear their own clothes, call the lecturers by their first name. They had a brilliant gym and girls. They're the things I was obsessed with. And my parents said, no, we think it'd be better if you stay at the grammar school. And it's like a switch flicked in my head, and I basically went, watch me. And for the next 2 years, I turned into, the biggest arsehole possible. I said I wasn't going to swear. There you go. I went to... there were 4 things really that kind of drove me. The first one was football. My mate's dad took us to an Arsenal game. Arsenal lost. The pies were horrible. The beer was flat. It rained. But I loved it. It was like I joined this angry, sweary family. I loved it. So I used to go to Highbury as often as I can. In order to go to football in the 80s, you had to wear the right clothes. So fashion became really important. I couldn't afford Burberry bucket hats and Lacoste jumpers every other week. So I started shoplifting. And one day, me and my mates were going to try and nick £1,000 worth of clothes in London. Started in Paul Smith in Covent Garden, went up to Oxford Street. By the time we got to Oxford Street, we got arrested. We went to court the following Monday. Didn't tell our parents, but my dad was waiting at the station when I got off the train after being given a conditional discharge, which meant if we nicked anything in the next year, we would go to prison. I have a criminal record now. And my dad was waiting at the station. My dad, the former police officer, came to pick me up. So you can imagine how that went. you've heard of, Alex Ferguson's hairdryer treatment. Well, my mullet was flapping behind me as he was screaming in my face. It was like 17 years of anger came out in one go. And then, so football, fashion, fighting, 80s football synonymous with violence. I'd kind of fallen down now into this kind of toxic, if you like, but I call it dominance-based masculinity rabbit hole. That said, you have to be hard. You can't ever you can't ever refuse a fight. If you do that, you're weak. And the problem with what I call dominance-based masculinity is that everywhere you look, there's a fight. There's a fight with other blokes in ugly nylon shirts that are different from your ugly nylon shirts. There are blokes, there are fights with authority figures, with parents, with teachers. Everywhere you look, there's a fight. And if you're steeped in this kind of idea, you are not allowed as a man to back down, because then you've bottled it, you've crapped out. Predictably, I got arrested for that as well, smashing up a pub. Got arrested with the pool cue in my hand, another criminal record. During the time I'm supposed to be doing my A-levels, I've already been thrown off one A-level for telling the English teacher to F off. So it's not going great, guys. It's not going great. And then, so that's football, fashion, fighting, and girlfriends. I spent a lot of time thinking about girls, going out with girls, getting off with other people's girlfriends. I was just basically poison in human form. As a result of all this behavior in those 2 years, I got an E and a U from A-level from a grammar school. So this is a really privileged school position I was in. I basically wrecked it by getting involved in pretending to be someone I wasn't, because I was fueled by anger because my parents said no. If that doesn't summarize the kind of harmful effects of the man box, or, dominance-based masculinity, I don't know what does. It took me years to kind of overcome that. And then I worked for 17 years in various different jobs. And then one day I realized, as I was leaving work at my job at a university in the Northwest, really good job. I was on 40 odd grand a year 20 years ago. I was on really good money. The doors opened, cold air hit me on the face, and I just thought, oh, that's the best part of my day. And then I thought, hang on, that's the best part of my day, leaving work, not driving through the Lake District to meet, to go home to my wife and my two daughters, who were 3 and 9 at the time. I just thought, what am I doing? So, as we've said, that idea about masculinity, you're not allowed to have your feelings, you're not allowed to speak about your feelings, you're not about to. For once in my life, I spoke to my wife about how I was really feeling. Because she's a counsellor. She spent 35 years being a counsellor, listening to people's problems. I used to joke that she never brought her ears home. The truth was, I never said anything. I didn't say I was verging on depressed. I didn't say I was really stressed out with work. I didn't say I hated every moment at work. I didn't say that I thought my life should be better. I should be doing something else. This was 38, 39, the classic kind of midlife crisis thing. So we worked together, and she basically said, you need to work with young people. And it was that moment, and I've seen it on a meme, and it basically says, be the person you needed when you were younger. And that something sums me up. It's that. Because I didn't feel right at school. I didn't feel like I fitted in. I was a very academic school. I was okay. I was clever, but I didn't want to be put in that academic box. Hated the pressure, rebelled against it all. So anyway, went away to college, came back home, was okay. Then I got testicular cancer, and that was 22. So, I often say to young men when I'm working with them, I do a session called Life by the Balls for teenagers, about testicular cancer, about men's health, about looking after yourself. It took me 6 weeks to actually pluck up the courage to go to the doctors. And in that time, it had got so much worse. The cancer had traveled everywhere. And the doctor basically said, what are you doing tomorrow? So by the time I went to the GP, the following day, I went to Stoke Mandeville Hospital and had my testicle removed. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
And again, not allowed to show vulnerability, not allowed to show weakness. It's a bit embarrassing to talk about your bollocks, that kind of, and it was just, all of this stuff has led me to so many problems in my life, this kind of idea of being a real man, that it took a long time to kind of unpick that. So had chemotherapy, and I always say to young men, when I'm working, that if you want to challenge your masculinity, have one of your bollocks removed, because it really does make you think about what matters, and this obsession with low testosterone males and all this kind of stuff. And you've said that I do a lot of stuff on Instagram. I talk about male violence against women and girls, which often gets described as pandering. She won't let you smash, bro, and all this kind of stuff. The fact that I'm talking about issues that are caused by male violence automatically, in some men's eyes, means that I'm low testosterone, or I must be doing it because I'm trying to get clicks and likes and women to slide into my DMs or whatever. It's fascinating. So I get called low testosterone quite a lot, because they're young men are obsessed with it, and we're going to talk about the Manosphere in a bit. I think I'm sure we're going to talk about that Louis Theroux documentary, but part of that whole thing about gym bro culture and being high testosterone and being virile, I'll often reply with, well, I've only got one testicle. I've got two daughters that we had naturally, so maybe mine's working twice as hard as yours, mate. I don't know. I've developed a series of kind of very, I suppose, apposite responses that they have nowhere to come back from, really. I have had 8 times men have said, well, let's hope cancer has another go then. So this is the kind of online world that we're seeing, this kind of empathy-free, got to attack, got to win, and they're all from men. I've never had a woman tell me that online. So we are in quite a poisonous kind of place, in terms of where we are. So then I started working in schools. Back to my story. I told you this would be quick. I mean, and then
It's a good story.
there's lots of ups and downs. So then, in 2012, I got a call from my mum. And she said, there's been an accident. Your sister Sarah's dead. And I said, what are you on about? She said, there's been an accident. Sarah's dead. Her partner, Ian, is talking to the police. And I thought that I just had no concept of what was going on. About an hour later, Northumberland police phoned me and said that Sarah is dead. She had been killed by her partner, and that they were treating it as murder, that he was likely to be charged with murder. And what turns out was she'd left her husband and kids about nearly 2 years ago by this guy, because of this guy that she's been talking to online. She'd been talking to him on kind of motorbike forums and car forums. And then what I now know is that what it's called is that he'd been love bombing her. He'd been kind of sending her direct messages and kind of building this relationship. And then one day he said, basically, I can't live without you. Come and live with me in Newcastle. So they hatched a plan. She left her husband and kids and went to live with this guy in Newcastle. And then it became apparent through the police reports that I've read subsequently and the kind of court case that not long after that, he started to be controlling and quite violent. And there were about 14 or 15 different incidents where the police were called to the house, where she ended up in A&E. She had 10 black eyes in the course of her relationship. She had broken teeth and all sorts of stuff. And on the evening, he basically, that he'd been charged with common assault in, I think it was the 14th of February 2012. So on Valentine's Day, he was in court for an incident where she'd been hospitalized for 4 days. He hit her across the head multiple times with a rolling pin. He was charged as a victimless crime because Sarah refused to press charges against him, which again is another feature of coercively controlling relationships, where, in relationships with coercively controlling people, is that there's going to be consequences if you press charges. Not only, because if someone's already proven themselves to be violent and you're holding them to account, it can take 2 to 3 years for these kind of cases to come to court if they ever do. So you're going to face consequences. So, it was victimless crime. He was taken to court, and he was given anger management training, which is, because controlling people, they use their temper, they don't lose their temper. So going on a kind of anger management training just helps them to control it better. There's this whole load of misunderstanding around coercive control and the way anger and violence and manipulation are used as part of a control mechanism. But that's a massive. Well, I've made myself a bit of an expert on it because of what happened to Sarah. And then, so on the 25th, basically he was, if I'm rambling, sorry. Let me just, as a result of what happened on the 25th of February, in light of his previous court case for common assault, where he was told, A, he had to have anger management, and also they were not allowed under the same roof, 2 police officers came to their house on the 25th of February because there had been a disturbance, and the neighbours had basically phoned up and saying there's a disturbance of the peace. And what they looked like they'd been doing is throwing each other out of the flat. They were on a first floor flat. They were throwing documents out, and they'd been drinking, and they were throwing stuff out, throwing stuff all over the place. And 2 police officers turned up, but someone had spelled the address wrong. They lived in a place called Tewkesbury Road, and someone had spelled Tewkesbury wrong. And all it brought up, instead of the fact that he shouldn't even be at the address, all it brought up was a previous driving offence. So those officers didn't know that he shouldn't be there, that there'd been loads of previous calls. So they helped him tidy up. He took charge and went, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, bit drunk. Sorry. It won't happen again. I've just come in. Don't know what she's doing. Let's tidy it up. We're going to have a cup of coffee, have some food, and go to bed early." The coppers went away. So they didn't know that he shouldn't have been there. They didn't arrest him. And then that was at about 5:30. And then at 8:05, he phoned 999 and said, "I've just killed my partner. I've just stabbed my partner." Those 2 officers went back with paramedic, and when they arrived, Sarah's body it had bled out next to the sofa. She was lying in the lounge. She was dead on their arrival. So he was arrested on suspicion of murder. And then on the 29th of November, after a 2-week court case, he was convicted of murder unanimously and got life with a minimum of 17 years. So because I was working in schools, I didn't really know what I could do, whether it was my story to tell. I didn't know whether I should do anything about it. So I chose not to at first. And then it wouldn't let me go. It wouldn't leave me. Although Sarah and I weren't close, didn't really have a relationship as adults. We'd send each other kids' birthday and Christmas presents. We weren't the kind of siblings that were texting each other jokes and stuff like that. We just basically made a decision as we were adults to go in different directions. But I still felt that I had a kind of duty to do something with what happened to Sarah. So I created a workshop around domestic abuse, and that's kind of morphed into now, as I've learned more about it, into coercive control. And so far, I think I've spoken to about 60,000 young people in schools across the UK about what happened to Sarah, and how I'm now talking about how the manosphere and narratives of control are really contributing to this idea of coercive control, and how young people's relationships are quite often informed by monitoring each other, manipulation tactics, checking where you are, those kind of things. So, I mean, everyone needs to know about coercive control, because the number one thing that happens when women escape relationships with abusive men is they say, "I wish I'd known about coercive control before I met them." So one of my goals is that no young person goes into a relationship and gets manipulated and controlled because they don't understand coercive control. My kind of mission, I suppose, is that everyone understands that the manipulation tactics, it's a process, it's an absolute pattern, that everyone understands it. And that's what I do now. So after working in schools for 20 years, I've now switched from doing enterprise and business and a mixture of PSHE, personal, social, health, and economic. I now do almost exclusively work on relationships, stereotypes. What makes a man is my kind of Instagram name, but it's also the name of the company that I now run. And it's also about what makes us us. How can we be healthier versions of men? How can we unpick some of those old school dominance-based man box cultures that harm us and definitely harm the people around us? And how can we tune out some of those narratives that are coming from the men with microphones, which is us, not us, we're the good guys, and how that is leading to a generation of young men that think what they should do is control their woman, that they should treat their woman badly, that, you know, if you're overly nice to women, then they take advantage of you, then you're a simp, you're a loser, you're a cuck, all of this language that's been created for someone that basically treats women like human beings. And I think that's where we are now. And that's why schools getting in touch with me, people are asking me, I'm getting loads of DMs on Instagram from parents saying, "My son's doing this, my daughter's been a victim of this. How do I work with this? So there's a massive amount of work to do, not only in educating young people themselves, but also parents. Parents haven't got a clue. And I think if that's one of the things that came out of last year's Adolescence from Netflix, that first 10 minutes, that he's 13, he's at home, he's safe. That kind of idea that parents are so disconnected from young people's kind of online personas that load of us as parents don't really want to know what they're looking at, but in ways we really need to know what they're looking at. I feel grateful that my daughters are now 31 and 26, that they're kind of past. I mean, they will have been sent stuff that I don't want to know about, but that they're past the age where their behavior on a daily basis is being checked, tracked, and monitored by boys in their class, and that kind of stuff. So I hope that kind of sums up where I am and why I do what I do. That took 20 minutes, but we went off in a number of different tangents. But I hope that we might get through 3 questions at this rate.
No, but the story is really like what I really take from what you said in the story there is like, this isn't something you're talking about from this kind of ivory tower position of, oh, my life's, I've been emotionally in touch and blah, blah, blah my whole life. This is something that you've lived. Like, this is stuff that's lived and impacted your everyday life throughout your life. So you're not coming from a place of like, I think there are a lot of influencers out there who grew up in spaces where they were always emotionally attuned and they had good parents and they had good relationships and stuff. So they were like, oh, and they're teaching this stuff, but they don't teach it from a position of knowing the incredible pain it is to come from a place where you live in dominance masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Or what some people call toxic masculinity, or you have seen firsthand the impact of these small controlling behaviors and how they escalate, and that they do lead to serious harm, and in your case, the death of your sister, the murder of your sister, and I think it's really easy for someone online to be like, oh, well, this small behavior here is no big deal,
Yeah.
right? Like, we know the kind of, what is it? It's like a pyramid, isn't it? Like the bottom
Yeah.
is checking your partner's phone or sexist jokes. And we go, as men, we're like, oh, my mate said that thing and he was just
It's
joking.
just
He's not like that.
joking. Yeah.
But we know how that pyramid escalates into, like you said, actions into suddenly
Yeah.
it's like rape, is groping, it's like serious things
100%.
that men are doing
Yeah. That's cool. I
because the
think there's
ladder reaches
the
upwards.
rape pyramid is one of those that kind of starts with sexist jokes and that kind of stuff. Another brilliant one is comes from SHARP, which is the Sexual Harassment and Rape Prevention Department in the US military, of all places, and it's kind of like a rainbow striped continuum. It's called the continuum of harm, and it really sets it out well. It starts green with our moral code and our kind of, like the mottos that we have, and then through to kind of behaviors and how we want people to behave. Then amber, the things that were a little bit of like warning signs, and then we get towards a darker orange, and then we get red, and then we've got the kind of black square, which is the kind of serious sexual assaults and kind of but it's a really good visual way of showing that this stuff. And if you look at what happened with Sarah Everard's case, for example, Wayne Couzens, a serving firearms officer who everyone in the office called the rapist, who made jokes about, and his other behaviors were, going through McDonald's drive-throughs with his dick out, these kind of things, and flashing and those kind of things. Those things escalate. And if we don't investigate and look at those things, then what are they doing elsewise, and what other behaviors are they going to then think is okay because they've got away with that one? And that's why the continuum of harm and the rape pyramids are so important, because those de-escalations only happen if there's interventions, if there's people like bystander intervention. I noticed in London recently quite a lot of kind of bystander stuff on reporting and stuff and information about upskirting and, sexual harassment and rubbing up and that kind of stuff. Like, you have to actually spell out, men, you should not be doing this. Here's a reminder: don't rub your genitals against a woman on her way to work. Don't take photos up a woman's skirt when she's on her way to home. It's just the fact that we have to do this. And this is why my work in schools, I think, is vital to changing attitudes early. Because once that stuff becomes, and they're surrounded, you know, like I was saying, I kind of fell into this dominance-based masculinity thing. The internet didn't even exist when that was happening in the early 80s and, you know, mid 80s. They're completely kind of wall to wall 24/7 surrounded by stuff now, which 70 odd % of what they see, they don't even look for. The algorithms are spitting this stuff out and, you know, staying in their brain on a regular basis, but then it becomes normalized. Then that language, as you were just saying, David, those languages become, that language becomes normalized. Oh, all our mates talk about women like that. So you're in an echo chamber of harm, really, and then that only escalates. What goes on, what happens on tour stays on tour, you know, those kind of things, the bro code and all these ways we kind of look after, you know, men are protectors. They spend most of their time protecting their image around their friends.
Yes.
So, I mean,
yeah, men are very much obsessed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, men are very concerned about their how they're perceived by people around them,
By the
right?
who
I had a
around them?
conversation with someone
By
recently.
the who around them?
Mostly the men around them,
Yeah.
right?
There's a thing called homosociality. Have you
I've
come across that?
no,
It's called most men are heterosexual but homosocial, which means that
yes,
they fancy women, they want to have, you know, they want to have relationships with women, but the only place they get kudos, respect, and approbation from is from the men. So we're obsessed with the male gaze as men. We're obsessed with it. We want other men to think that we're the best. And it starts in school with the best trainers and the best backpacks and the best haircuts. It carries on into adult life with private number plates and brand new BMWs and platinum cars, which is what the whole of the Manosphere is based on, this conspicuous wealth with the, I don't even own a watch, you know, this kind of nonsense and all this kind of stuff about, this is how you show that you're a real man, while smoking on a cigar, which we all know is a replacement. Yeah, well, anyway.
since we're getting into the manosphere, I think it's a good point to start to move into the Louis Theroux's documentary, right? So, listeners, I imagine if you're listening to this, you've heard that he put out a documentary where I think from what I saw, I watched it the other night actually, so it's quite fresh in my mind. He, you know, spent a year filming, you know, with some of these stars. I don't know if that's the right
It's
word.
definitely not
Infamous
the right
characters
word,
in the
but I know what you mean.
inside the manosphere. He spoke to, I might forget people's names, I don't remember all of them. He spoke to a guy who goes by the name of HS Tiki Toki, which every time I say that it makes me laugh because it sounds like quite a child's name. He spoke to Harrison, spoke to Harrison's mum. He also spent some time with Myron, who is the man behind the Fresh and Fit. Myron's name, Fresh and Fit podcast. He spoke to a man in Louisiana whose name I can never seem to remember every time I mention him.
Justin Waller, I think his name is. Is it something Waller?
Justin.
Is it Justin?
Yes, Justin. You're right,
JB,
Justin.
that's
And he
what he
spent
calls
time.
himself, JB. He wears the worst suits and waistcoat combinations ever. Yeah, and he moved he moved to Miami so he could be closer to Mar-a-Lago to basically crawl up Trump's backside. So this is where the kind of manosphere starts to become a bit sinister, I think. Well, it's always a bit sinister, but that how it kind of has them political clout and political influence. You've got people like Jake Paul as well, the guy that recently got his face smashed up in that kind of by a professional boxer, who has recently been seen on stage with Trump. So there's a real clear line between manosphere ideology, suppression of women, and moving towards right wing and, you know, proto dictatorship content. So I think that's why we should all be worried about it. But carry on. Yeah, it was JB. Sneeko,
and then Sneeko features at the end. I think that's the only men he actually actively speaks to, from what I can remember.
Yeah.
And what we see is these men who have built up, I'll use a word that they use, clout within the manosphere by starting very sexist, misogynistic, racist, anti-Semitic views, right? Outrageous views, right? Rage, anything to get clicks. That becomes the feeling you get. It's like anything to get clicks,
because that currency literally turns into currency if you're monetized on your platforms. Yeah,
exactly. And as you said, the political piece is also interesting because it's like in the States, it's very obvious, right? Because you've got people like Sneeko, because Sneeko is one of the guys that was filmed singing Kanye West's particular song that had been banned across the world. He was in the group of the guys in the club there. But there's this obvious, as you watch it, it's like, oh, these guys aren't just online existing in power. They're getting into political circles. And I guess in many ways, and I wonder what your thoughts on this, the kind of king of the manosphere in many ways is Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. Depressingly enough. I mean, he represents so much of that stuff. In the Epstein files, how many times? Tens of thousands?
Thousands.
Tens of thousands of times. Never been held
The
accountable.
most featured man.
Yeah, never been held accountable for any of that. Starts a war to kind of distract from it. But this kind of, he embodies that kind of, all the things he said on hot mics, even if they were hot mics, they might have just been, you know, they let you do what you want when you're famous. You can grab them by, all of that stuff. And he absolutely embodies all of this. And I think the rise of the Manosphere has coincided very much with his rise. And I did that on purpose, and then you've got Elon Musk as well behind it pushing. He was saying, some of those guys saying, we got rid of we avoided a female president by electing Donald Trump, and we did it. This kind of stuff. There's loads of stuff behind the scenes, and you got Nick Fuentes. You've got also people like the late Charlie Kirk who were spouting a load of this stuff and just seemingly without consequence. Although Nick Fuentes did have to go to his mum's house for protection after he'd been shouting about your body, my choice, and people doxed him online. So he had to then go and hide in his mum's basement, which is a kind of perfect thing for an incel to have to do, I suppose. But this is the normalization of misogyny. This is the normalization of outwardly being misogynistic, homophobic, racist. And a lot of those things are part of the man box itself. Paul Cavell's man box culture. You probably know about this. Maybe your listeners don't. The man box was something that was kind of created as a concept by a guy called Paul Cavell, who was doing workshops and trying to prevent violence in Oakland, in California, in the late 70s and in the 80s. And he asked tens of thousands of young men who were kind of partly involved in criminal justice or had been to prison, what does being a man mean to you? And it basically structured the box that we call now the man box, this invisible cage of rules that we live within, that I fell into. Men should be financially, be able to kind of wash their face in public with money. So because there were no jobs, then loads of men were getting into crime because they see their mates with loads of money. So they were getting involved in crime. They must be physically strong and hard. So then you've got, in order to be involved in kind of crime, you need to be tough, physically tough, and that kind of unemotional, unfeeling, which kind of taps into that as well. You got physical and emotionally strong. People misinterpret stoicism, which is understanding your emotions as suppressing them. When you're told as a boy, oh, get up, don't cry, come on, be a big man, we're told very early on, and anti-empathy. Empathy is a sin, the sin of empathy, which has kind of come out of fundamental Christianity in America. They've actually written books about it. Pastors are writing books about the sin of empathy.
Wow.
I don't know whether they've heard of Jesus, but he was pretty big on empathy. But these Olympic level mental backflips to say we shouldn't be too empathetic because that's how the devil gets in, which then feeds into these old school ideas about masculinity of being, not being a caregiver, being a provider, almost kind of, I'm the man that brings the money in, you look after everything else to do with the house. Throwing back to gender roles, old school gender roles, obviously being a provider. If you're the one with the money, that enables control and suppression of women, because if women don't have access to their own cash, we're going back to the 1950s and beyond. Another one is homophobia. That's a massive part of the man box, because men are supposed to be sexually virile all the time, but never gay, because then you're not a proper man. That's why we've seen a rise in transphobia as well. It all links together. And so all of these things now is this man box, and that's basically what we're seeing. So what we're seeing is these guys in the manosphere, as we saw there, it was like we're escaping the matrix. But what they're saying is, join my matrix. Pay me to join my matrix. Come and join my set of rules. And it's, because the world is the world is controlled by a globalist elite, which is the anti-Semitic trope, which has got loads of traction across all over the place. And you heard Sneeko talking about it, these mad conspiracy theories. It's great because all of it is about blaming someone else. And that, for me, is at the heart of all of the Manosphere narratives. It's this, and I call it this, and people hate me for this, but it's true. What they're doing is they are manufacturing male victimhood where none exists. That is not me saying men don't struggle. That is not me saying men don't commit suicide or, take their own lives at a higher rate than other people. What that is saying is that you are being duped into thinking that the world is against men when men built the entire universe. We built the systems that create, control, manipulate, manage capitalism and power. So in order to say that men are struggling now, what they have to do is say women's rights have gone too far, which is the whole kind of anti-feminist backlash. When, if you really think about what feminism is, in not the kind of third wave, fourth wave, invented versions of feminism that people like Jordan Peterson talk about, he's like intellectual misogyny. And then you've got other guys like aspirational misogynists who we saw with the watches. Be horrible to women and look, you can have a nice watch. Be horrible to women and you can earn loads of money online, which is their whole business model. But all of that kind of idea that feminism's gone too far, that's the most poisonous thing of all of it, because A, it blames women. B, it misinterprets what feminism is. Feminism is equality in politics, economics, and society. How many societies on earth are equal? None. Not one single country on earth is equal by those metrics. And once you start digging into this and understanding what is behind the manosphere, all it is basically saying, you're struggling, mate. I can see you're struggling. Let's blame women. You need to break out of the matrix and come and earn money with me. In order to do that, you have to pay me, and then you join my cult. And it's disconnecting people from men from families, disconnecting men from women, because the teachings that they give are repellent, misogynistic behaviors that are not going to make women like you. And because of social media, they're going to share what they know about you online. So you're not going to be able to kind of meet women. You're then going to become even more isolated. And then the guy will go, well, that's because you've not invested enough money. That's because you're not a high value man enough. And then you've got boys smashing their faces with hammers so that their looks become more chiseled and stuff. So it's a really difficult place, I think, for a teenage boy to navigate. And it is quite compelling when you've got men shouting into microphones saying, it's women's fault. Look at my Lamborghini. I live in Dubai. When they clearly don't. They're living out of a content house for a week and they create enough content that lasts them for a year. But when you get down, I was saying my algorithm's absolutely cooked because I've been looking at a lot of this stuff lately. So I get tons of this stuff. But when you see enough of it, you can see it's just cut and paste misogyny. The same stuff comes up over and over and over again. A different car, a different night skyline, a different balcony overlooking an infinity pool in Dubai, but the words are the same. And the words are, you're a loser if you like women, if you're nice to women. You can be rich too if you escape the matrix. If you're a low value man, then you're not going to succeed. A high value man looks like this. Do you want the secrets? Join my Telegram channel because I've been banned from everywhere else or whatever it is. So all of it is monetized hate, basically. And no wonder boys are struggling. And no wonder girls are struggling because boys are treating them like the way they are. And, not all boys are going to be affected by this. Some boys will have amazing parents who role model so much better stuff that they just go, I don't want this. But the downside of that is that they become ostracized in their group because loads of their other mates might think like this. So as we know, the power of peer pressure is, am I rambling? I don't know, sometimes. But I think there is very much a direct line between what these guys are saying from Donald Trump, from his example of what his version of manhood, which is grift as much as you like and take no responsibility for yourself. The same is true of people like Boris Johnson, people like Nigel Farage, and people like Richard Tice behind Nigel Farage that say, Sharia laws taking over this kind of stuff, and then lives in a country like Dubai where they're not paying any tax and not contributing to the country, but they're saying, you know, I want to protect women and girls, and yet you're fleeing the country to live in a place which actually actively suppresses women and girls. So, you know, make your mind up, lads. And that's, I think, back to what you said earlier on, talking about the manosphere, the hypocrisies at the heart of all of it were exposed quite well by Louis Theroux about their kind
Yes,
of
yes,
attitudes to one-way monogamy. This whole idea that they should be able to do what they want as men, but their women should remain loyal to them. And you can see at one point, Angie, Myron Gaines's girlfriend, in that point, you can actually see her going, "Oh, I don't think I've signed up to this." And then at the end, in the
yeah,
kind of rushes at the outset, she's living on her own now. She's split up from him, you know, and then the way JB got got them to video at their house. So his wife was you know, not his wife, but the woman he treats like a wife who's not married. Two daughters, another child on the way, and you can see him waiting, saying, see, she's up for this. And there's points in there where he's thinking, oh, I can bring a woman home to her, and that's what we've agreed. And you can see her kind of looking off into the distance, going, well, okay, not really what I've agreed, but okay. And there's so much of that. And again, that's justifying their behavior because they're worried that they're going to look in a bad light, or they're going to be exposed for who they are. So there's so much artifice behind it. And I think that's one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm working with young men and boys. Just so, how do you think he's got that watch? How do you think it contributes to, who do you think's paying for that? Do you think he really cares about you? Or are you the people that are contributing to him having that watch and that car and that lifestyle that he pretends he's got? There's a really telling point in there, just to finish off on this. There's a really telling point to this where that JB wants to show off his amazing apartment with loads of windows in Miami. And Louis says, do you own this? And he went, this is a rental. And then he said, oh, yeah, it cost me about 20 grand a month, though, you know, it's expensive. And it's just, you can see the artifice crumbling the moment there's a question. And that's, you know, that HS Tiki Toki, which is a ridiculous name, like you said. But whenever they start to talk to him, whenever he said, well, you live abroad because you smashed up a car that you weren't insured for. Oh, here we go. Oh, trying to stitch me up. And so it's really funny. So that when he accuses Louis Theroux of kind of trying to make sensationalist content to make him look stupid, when that is his entire business model.
yes. And he admits it.
Yeah, he admits it.
he tells Louis up front that's his
Yeah, and
business
said,
model.
I don't give a fuck. But actually, the moment you kind of start to ask him questions about his own behavior, that's where, whoa, hang on a minute, I don't want to be behaving. Oh, yeah. So it's fascinating, isn't it? And you really do see behind the mask that they wear. Yeah. I think we've explored that pretty well, haven't we?
We've explored that really well.
I hope so.
There's one of the things in there. No. There's one of the things in there I think was really interesting is like the boys. They brought in two boys in Miami, two men in Miami who were like looking up to JB like he was some sort of Jesus character. And I remember seeing these two boys. I watched the program with my partner also, and we pause things a lot and talk about it. And we were like, look at these boys. If you look at these two guys, they look like sweet, like nice boys who, you know, they want to be good men. They want to be good men. And you can see in them, they just want to get out of the difficult circumstances they've been in. One of them's been homeless. Like there's poverty that runs through, right? This lack of finance, a lack of opportunity. They feel, yeah, we've got this economic situation that is making this worse, right? Because if these young men, from what I can see, and even sometimes when I've gone into schools, and I sat down with some boys once and I showed them a video by Andrew Tate. And in the video, Andrew Tate's saying how young people these days, they've got no attention, they can't pay attention to anything. Like, you know, he says some stuff that's, you know, really sensible and makes sense. And then he drops in, it doesn't say anything seriously ludicrous, but then he drops in about his Hustler University. And I pause the video and I go, boys, what's happening in this scene? And they're like, okay, he's one boy's like, oh, he's saying that we don't have attention. And I said, is that true? Do you find your attention is really skewed? He was like, yeah, like I find it really hard to pay attention. And we talked about that and blah, blah, blah. And then in the end, I said to them, I was like, okay, what is he trying to get you to do in this video? What's he trying to get you to do? And the boys basically almost in unison were like, he wants us to buy his product. And I was like, very good. That's very, very astute. You've seen that. You see that this is marketing, right? So I said to them, I was like, do you think he really cares about you? Do you think that he really cares about you? One boy was like, yes, like he cares about us, blah, blah, blah. And then another boy argued with him, right? And was like, well, no, he doesn't. He only cares about making money because he said all he cares about is making money. And they almost got into a bit of an argument, which I had to kind of bring down. But what I found really fascinating was that so many of the boys that I spoke to and I went through this workshop with were able to watch clips of some of these influence and actually see what was going on. They could see it, but there was also some, but they were completely blind to it. But one of the things that was really consistent across the group of boys was the obsession with money. The obsession with money. And when I asked them, I said, okay, why do you feel this way about money? What do you want to do with the money you have? Right. And what I felt heartbreaking, because it's also partly the experience I had growing up, was so many of them are like, my mum struggles. My mum works 2 jobs. We're always broke. We don't have the things we want. Like it was just this consistent thing of like, I want to be successful to help my family. So many of these boys were like, I want to have money so I can help my family. It wasn't, sometimes they'd be like, I want to buy a Bugatti and blah, blah, blah. But really, they were like, I would buy my mum a house and I'd make sure my sister could go to university. And they say all these really beautifully sweet things. And I guess what I'm getting to is how so much of this manosphere drive really doesn't necessarily target, it just seeps into young boys whom disadvantaged backgrounds, which is a big gap of boys right now, more and more. Like you said, no fathers, growing up in some level of poverty or lack that they're experiencing. And it speaks to them so deeply because, like you said, it's the watch, the cars, the lifestyle, the women that they don't have, and they can see their futures because they see it through their parents, and they can see a future where they never have what they want.
Yeah.
And they're searching for someone who can go, this is how you do it. This is how you get there.
Yeah. And it's really encouraging when you have those conversations with boys, because loads of them don't believe this stuff. Loads of them can see
Loads of them. Yeah.
But it does.
Loads of them even hate the misogyny.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that I like. You'll say, I've talked to some boys and they were like, this was a couple of years ago when you could still find Andrew Tate videos on YouTube. And they were like, I like that he wants to motivate us. I like that he wants to push us. I like that he talks about discipline and routine. And I'm like, those are all really good things. And they were like, what I don't like about him is how he talks about women, how he talks about like people of certain races and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, good. I'm really happy to hear that you're not just wholesale taking things. There's so many boys who do really reject a lot of the message.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's also a lot of boys that just take it wholesale as like, this person is Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And that's like trying to pick sweet corn out of a turd, isn't it? It's just that that kind of idea that, sorry, but he says some good things. Oh, that's massively outweighed by the way he gets your attention, which is by saying vile things about whole swathes of people. It really, I think one of the tipping points for loads of people with him was when he was trying to wind up the Southport race riots. And he then said, wow, people are being racist to me as a mixed race man. So suddenly it upsets you. And I think that's also one of the other central hypocrisies in the manosphere, which kind of links to this, is HS. And what he was saying about, oh, my mum hates me talking about this kind of stuff. My mum hates me talking about, I was brought up. His mum worked her backside off to send him to independent school. Probably be on a scholarship, but still, the equipment you need as a boy going to independent school is ridiculously expensive. So we have a man that actively talks about women as if they're dirt, makes money off the back of them through OnlyFans, judges them for that, has an agency that profits off them, and is showing at one point him getting sucked off in a toilet, which he's then going to put on his own Telegram channel to make more money off himself doing sex work effectively. But what he does, which I think they all do, is they say, well, this is content. This is me, but this is content. And him saying, I don't give a fuck, he says it all the time, which means he really, really does care. But that is
Yes.
trying to tell himself he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the hypocrisy, but their entire lives are based on a deck of cards. They're a whole kind of house of cards. And if they allowed themselves to believe that actually what they're doing is as bad as it is, then they couldn't look themselves in the mirror, which is where they spend
They'd feel the
97%
shame that
of
they
their
want to
time
avoid.
looking in a mirror. But they don't see what they don't want to see. So all of it, the whole of it is hypocrisy. And I think that's a really clever thing that they do, their own mental trick, the same way that Andrew Tate does it. This is content. It doesn't really matter what I say. But yet what they don't finish off in that, they only just scratch the surface of it towards the end, is the real world impact of all of these guys and all of this repeated stuff about feminism going too far, women are the devil, men are, backed up by things like Lost Boys reports from shadily funded think tanks on Tufton Street that say, oh, boys are oppressed now. That's what you get. And you get division every single place. And I think since 2016, since Brexit, since Donald Trump in America, we have had nothing but division. And this is yet another layer which lends itself really nicely towards a divided populace. And I think that's, for me, that's the most depressing thing about it, is because loads of the people creating this content, A, don't believe it, and B, don't care about the impacts of it. And the impacts of it, you see it in one of the clips in Sneeko in that video, where kids go up and go, oh, women are stupid, or whatever they say. And they go, whoa. And he says, oh, what have I done? Mate, you know what you've done. And you had the choice to change that, but you've made it worse. You've doubled down. You've been banned from every platform, but you're allowed back on YouTube now. So you are just creating the same kind of content again and again and again that does the same thing. Look at Nick Fuentes. Look at Charlie Kirk. They're all out of the same mold. And what they're doing is they're backing up capitalism again, which is about you're on your own, mate. The world doesn't care about you. Quite a lot of times recently, I've seen kind of videos and like B-roll videos, and then over the top it says, you think it's tough now. As a man, it gets worse. And that kind of whole narrative that you're on your own, you have to solve your own problems, the world hates you, all of those things are really, really clear demarcations that come from manosphere narratives and kind of online misogyny narratives. And largely, it's not even anything vague. Women hate you. Women have caused this. We live in a gynocracy, which is utter garbage, but they are so wedded to this idea that that's become part of who they are. And so, oh, sorry, I'm rambling on a bit now. You might want to cut some of that stuff out.
No, but it's so, and there's also these pervasive, there's these little narratives they put in. Like there's a point in there's two things I want to mention actually. There's this idea that men were born with zero value. You know, those young boys, they said it. They were like, we're born with no value. Women are born with value because they have beauty. We're born with no value, which really touches on one of the deepest beliefs I see in men time and time again, is that it's just like your t-shirt, right? Which is, we are not enough. I am not enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm worthless. That's the most consistent, I'd say, dysfunctional belief that men have, right? And I'd say it goes like almost like a global consciousness with men.
I have to
So they
prove
tap into
myself.
that.
I have to prove
Yes,
I'm
which is
worthy.
basically precarious masculinity, right? That my masculinity, my worth as a man is always on the edge of a cliff. I'm always having to prove it in every moment, whether it's the next fight I do, the next trade I do, the next woman I pick up. I'm constantly fighting against this sense and feeling of being worthless. And I'm having to prove it in every single moment of my life.
Yeah, which is absolutely weaponized by this 80% of women only want the top 20% of man, this high value man nonsense. Ask a woman what they think a high value man is, and it's someone who's kind, empathetic, and picks the kids up from school and texts you back, doesn't send you a photo of their dick as text number 3. You know, there's quite a lot of things that if we were to listen to what women are telling us about what they value in men, then that would help. A friend of mine that does this work, Matt Pinkett, said one of the ways he challenges this kind of top 20% myth, this 6-figure, 6-pack, 6 inches and all that kind of stuff. He basically puts up a photo of an absolutely gorgeous model in like Calvin Klein underwear, and they said, any of your dads look like this guy? Because that crumbles the artifice immediately, because they'll be thinking, my dad's fat, my dad's bald, my dad's this, my dad's that. Yeah, my dad leaves skid marks in the toilet, you know, this kind of stuff. The reality of it. Look around restaurants, walk through a shopping centre, look at who's holding hands together. They do not look like Calvin Klein underwear models. They do not look like they've just walked off an All Saints catwalk. They just look like men. But the reason they have currency with women is that they're palatable, they're nice, they're kind, they think about what women want in their lives, and they're acknowledging the fact that we as men are works in progress.
There's a scene in there, again, me and my partner, we paused this, where Myron's doing his podcast and he brings in the influencer girls to be there and for him to ridicule. And what's really interesting about this is it sets up the narrative and then reinforces his beliefs, right? Because what he does is go, hey, what are you looking for in a man? And she's like, 6 figures, 6 foot, and blah blah blah. I can't remember. And then he gets his calculator up, which is funny because there's some in the calculator. There's some truth in what he said, but what is sneakily happening here is he is belittling her to make himself look big, but he's also proving this is what all women want, right? And this is what you're not. But he's bringing women who he is inviting them in, right? They go on his show so they get exposure, which I'm sure he probably gets paid on the back end of as well, right? So he's in his interest for him to belittle them, right? It's in his interest for them to prove that his narrative about this is what all men want is true.
Yeah.
But he's not bringing on like, a I don't know, a doctor in psychology and relational dynamics to have a conversation with him. He's bringing on a 19-year-old influencer, OnlyFans, like whatever it is they do, not believing what they do, but it's like you're bringing in young girls who are immature and they're answering a question that, you're 19 years old. What did I want in a woman when I was 19? It's very different to what I want when I was in my mid-30s, right? As a mature man.
Yeah.
And he's teaching men by showing them, like, this is what women want. This is what women want. I'm telling you, this is what women want. And then he gets to make himself look big.
Look, our scientific calculator has proved that she's wrong and all this kind of stuff. It's mad, isn't it? Yeah. Imagine him having a conversation with someone who is like a gender expert. Say someone like Liz Plank, who wrote For the Love of Men. Imagine them two having a conversation.
Yeah.
He would never do that because he would have his ass handed to him on a plate. And also, he would look ridiculous. And it would destroy.
And he does, because Louis questions him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, Yeah. And he said, when he finds out that Louis gone to talk to the woman that does the bookings. Oh, stop that. Get her out of here. Get him out of here. It's so obvious that it's all smoke and mirrors in it. And the moment the smoke starts to clear, they light another fire because they desperately need that to be that artifice. And the fact that he's written a book, Myron Gaines has written a book, hasn't he, called Why Women Deserve Even Less. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
I saw there's a brilliant meme of a woman who takes a photo over her shoulder. She's done a selfie. There's a bloke reading it on the train in full sight, and it just says, "Men aren't lonely enough." But just that women deserve even less is the book that he's written, and I just think obviously that again appeals to that dynamic, and it'll be full of skewed statistics if there's any in it at all, full of bigotry, full of kind of manufactured male victimhood. And that I reserve that term for the men that create this victimhood. And I don't, like I said, I don't take anything away from men that are struggling. But the reason most men are struggling is because of the man box and how it restricts our ability to be open, to be honest, to be vulnerable, to understand our emotions from the word go. So they're the things that harm us. It's not women having better paid jobs than us in one tiny section of one tiny part of industry in one age bracket in the UK.
So, question, as we've gone through, really dissected this, what's the antidote for these young men, and not just young men
Yeah.
really, but what is the antidote for them?
Critical thinking for a start. As you said, working with those boys, getting them to think, well, why are they saying this? Why are they sharing this stuff? Obviously it benefits them, but what's the impact on me? Secondly, I think role modeling. We talk about role models. We talk about male role models. I talk about people like Loyal Kana a lot. I talk about people like Jordan Stevens a lot, recommend their books. I talk about people like Pedro Pascal. I talk about sports people like Andy Murray, who constantly calls out, reporters for saying things like, you're the first blah, 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 or I'm the first male one. Venus and Serena have been doing it for years, kind of multiple Olympic champions and that kind of stuff. And I'm just trying to highlight the good in men, the good that men can do, and the fact that Mark Ruffalo constantly talking about the suppression of women and misogyny in the public life, and so you don't have to conform to this stuff to A, be successful, and B, be outspoken, and C, do okay with women if that's one of your measures. In fact, being like this, like these guys that are shouting into microphones telling you to be, that's almost a perfect guarantee that you will not be happy, that you will be resentful, and you will then fall further into their arms. So, critical thinking, better role models, read books. Another thing that's been kind of promoted by these guys is the idea that reading's for losers. I did a reel recently on Andrew Tate. He said, "Oh, why do I want to read a book? I want to be making money and in bitches and all this kind of stuff." That's what I want to be doing. And it's the anti-intellectualism, which basically fascism and overwhelming capitalism depends on. It depends on you not thinking about why you're spending that money, why you want to buy this, why you want that car, why you want this stuff. It demands you to be an unthinking slave to it. So you are essentially like I said, you're swapping the matrix that they call it for their own little kind of confining box of what masculinity is. And actually, I think that the fourth thing is look around you. Look around at the reality. If you think it's only 6 foot, 6 figure, or these men that get women, I suppose that the underlying framework is that if you want to get a 10 out of 10 women. So the whole thing is based on misogynistic judgments of what women have value and what men have value, and that you should only be looking for these. Love doesn't come prepackaged with a bow. Love comes from human connection and belief and respect and understanding. I said earlier on that in May this year, I would have been married 30 years, and we've got 2 daughters, and they are incredible women. And I just think, it's not easy. When I was first in a relationship with Val, I didn't even know how to have arguments. I didn't understand what emotions I was feeling, let alone be able to tap into them, express them, talk about them, and understand what that made me feel and how I could express it. I would just clam up. There were like whole points in where we were having a discussion and I wouldn't speak for 10 minutes because I was trying to work out, what do I feel? Don't know what I feel. Do I feel this? Am I allowed to say this? If I say this, are we finished? We are taught as men to basically blank all our emotions. And no one stands up and said, this is what being a man's about, but we absorb this stuff. We absorb it without question. And all of a sudden, we're locked inside an invisible cage that we don't even have the key to. And unlearning that takes a lifetime. That's the work that we do and that men in our space do. Because women have been talking about this for years and women don't get listened to. Certainly not by men who are already misogynistic. And there are loads of misogynistic men that don't listen to me either. But I get loads of messages from women that say, I showed my husband or my partner or my boyfriend some of your reels, and I think he's starting to get it.
Yes.
And I have feedback from schools. We've had a girl come in and say she's in a relationship with a controlling boyfriend. We've had someone disclose that this has happened to them. These are the tiny wins. These are the tiny things that mean she's going to be safer. He's going to get some support. He's going to get some help for what happened. And they're the glimmers for me. And I think we're not going to fix this overnight, because we now have a whole chunk of young men and boys who are potentially, not all boys, but are potentially going to be impacted by this kind of content, by these kind of narratives that are constantly being fed to them. The only way we can unpick that is by being the men we want other boys to men to be like. And that's the only, and opening up conversations, calling people in and saying, mate, I didn't really appreciate that. Do you want to talk about it? Something bothering you? Let's have a chat. And that's the only way it's going to change. It's a long-term plan. And I'm old. The only way it's going to change is by helping young men who are younger than us to kind of go on and do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And for them to see that, I think this is a really, the piece I was talking to my partner about this is like, these guys in the Manosphere are able to show very overtly what success looks like, you know, money, cars, women. But what a lot of young boys are never taught or shown is that success is like, you know, inner peace, happiness, joy, friends that you enjoy your time with, people you can be honest with, a family that you can, you know, talk to or not talk to, you know, the things that you can't show in a 20-second Instagram reel, but the things that you feel internally, the things you get to experience in your life, the adventures you get to have. Those are the things that can be very difficult to show someone that make life worth living.
100%. And so much of that content is about material stuff instead of inner peace. This idea that you will be happy when you're rich. You probably won't, because you'll be looking over your shoulder thinking, who's going to take my money off me? You might lose some money and think, well, my value's just gone down. That's the danger behind all of it, is that our value is tied to material stuff, which is a perfect little, you make yourself into a perfect little servant for the Matrix yet again. So, you know, isn't it ridiculous if they're talking about the Matrix that wants you to pay tax and wants you to buy this and that, but they're saying in order to be successful, you need to buy into my Matrix and buy a watch, buy a Lamborghini, and you're basically giving someone a route to different forms of spending to kind of justify them in different ways. When I really wish so much more content focused on character rather than materialism. We'd be in a lot better, be a lot better place in the world, wouldn't we? But then we get called do-gooders, and we get called, like you said before, men in ivory towers who've lived it all and have a charmed life. I had a nice upbringing, but I really shot myself in the foot by being an absolute dickhead.
Oh, Bernie, this has been a wonderful conversation. So fascinating to hear your story. I imagine people want to hear more from you. You know, how can they get you into their schools, into their companies, into their offices, you know, even into working, you know, working with you? Like, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, I'm starting now to work more in organizations to talk about male allyship and to talk about the,
Mm.
I suppose, unhealthy cultures that have developed over years in male-dominated industries, and you know where the gender pay gap is largest. So I'm doing some work in companies. You can find me on LinkedIn at Andrew Bernie Bernard. You can find me on Instagram at _whatmakesaman_. And they're the main places. I'm in the process of changing my website and stuff, so I don't really want to give you the website address for that. So that's the main places, and things seem to be going quite nicely for me on Instagram. There's a lot of stuff on there. You can see what I talk about. You can see what I do, and there's also kind of contact links and link trees on there so you can find me that way. So that's me.
Fantastic. And just to throw in as well, Bernie's got some courses in there for teachers, for parents, for, you know, that you can just go in and jump into to learn and understand a lot more the topics that we've talked about in terms of the manosphere and controlling behavior.
Yeah, thanks, David. I've done a kind of an understanding on how we as everyday humans can understand things like coercive control and manipulative behavior. Also, there's a session for teachers so they can understand the CPD as if it's live presentation for 45 minutes, which you can use as many times as you like over a year. And I'm putting together one at the moment for parents. Thank you, David. You've lined me up very nicely there.
You're
I'm the
welcome. You're
efficient
very
sales.
welcome. And listeners, this is probably a good episode for you to share with someone in your life. There's probably a man in your life who might have been in Bernie's situation, or even my situation in life, who is looking to get out, but maybe he doesn't know how to. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how, the way suppression of his emotions and so forth are impacting him. So share that with him. Or maybe this is an episode that you need to sit down with your partner and listen to, especially if you've got kids of a certain age or young boys and girls of a certain age. I think it's really important to listen to get some understanding of what's really going on. But that's enough for me, and I'll say thank you for listening. Thank you to Bernie, and I say ciao ciao to you listeners.